And with shoulder training, I typically see them as more of like an add-on, rather than isolating a single day to shoulders alone. Well, it is Monday, which means it is time for another original video. And it's also following from last Monday's video in which we did the shoulder tier list of kind of my preferred exercises and where I believe they kind of stood in the rankings, all that good stuff. Part 2 of the TFNL growth guide, which I will indeed be doing for pretty much all muscles over the course of this year. And we're going to discuss how to develop those bolder shoulders, you know, so the deltoids. And that is indeed the plan for today. But before we do the video, or before we crack on with the video even, we must do what needs to be done, which is obviously, if at any point you decide you like the video, please let me know you like the video by liking the video. 1,300 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we reach that, that'd be bloody amazing. I would very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, and perhaps you actually find yourself enjoying this series, please consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week, but only if you feel comfortable doing so. And at the end of the video, I'll obviously do comment question of the week, in which I answer a question from the previous comment section. So if you have a question you want me to answer, drop it down below in the comment section and I shall do so. It's getting really hot now. It's getting bloody warm in England, like horrendously warm. And I love it. I don't love it. I don't go outside much, as you can tell. I love training in it because, I don't know, character building. What it is. And unfortunately one of the gyms I go to does not have any aircon, so I'm going to have a bloody spicy time in there. It's fun. I really feel like I should have put some effort into plumping this up, because at the moment it's looking like I've just got out of bed. It stinks. Absolutely stinks. Whatever this wig's made of is smelly. Hopefully this video won't be too excessively long, but we're going to talk about some good bits and bobs today. Hypertrophy, so the development of muscle, does not mean that you want to necessarily become a bodybuilder. It simply means that you want to build some muscle in certain areas. So today we're going to speak about building the shoulders. And regardless of what your goals are, developing even just a little bit of muscle can often benefit pretty much all of them. So when we talk about the shoulders, so the deltoids, we're thinking about kind of three areas. So we've got the anterior delt, which is obviously the front muscle of the deltoid. We've got the side delt, which is obviously that cat-looking muscle here. And we've got the rear delt, the posterior delt, which is obviously back here. A lot of the principles kind of shown in the previous TFNL growth guide for the glutes still apply here. When you're looking at kind of sets, reps, and all that stuff, the same applies. So as like a quick reminder, sets I typically do between, let's say, 2 and 3 sets per movement, totaling anywhere from about 8 to 30 sets per week. For shoulders, I'd probably be much more towards the lower end of that range, but it really does depend on you and your goals. Reps, anywhere from about 5 to 30 reps, which is what we consider the hypertrophy rep range. As anything less than that, the kind of fatigue is very high for a very low return on investment. So high fatigue, low stimulus, therefore stimulus to fatigue ratio isn't very favorable. Anything more than that, again, the stimulus to fatigue ratio also isn't particularly favorable. When it comes to rest periods, again, you rest as long as you need to rest. I did cover this in the previous video, but essentially for most people, provided you are training to, if not close to, failure, we're looking at about 3 to 5 minutes rest. But again, that very much depends on you, your abilities, and your proximity to failure, and also your goals as well. And then obviously intensity, to obviously maximize the building of muscle, we want to be training the green zone of hypertrophy. So that's anywhere from 4 reps left in the tank, so 4 reps from failure, all the way to no reps left in the tank, so reaching failure. Reps in reserve, so how many reps you have left in the tank, is a very useful tool to understand and implement into your training, but you also have to be really honest with yourself, and you also have to have a really good gauge of where failure actually is. Because a lot of times your mind will give out before your body does. So you might do a set of shoulder press and feel like after 8 you can't do any more, but in a lot of cases you probably could have done 9, 10, 11, maybe even 12. If you think 8 is failure and you, let's say, do 2 left in the tank, so 2 reps in reserve, you go to 6, but 12 is your real failure, you're actually not in that green zone of hypertrophy. Now we look at training frequency, which is a bit of an interesting one for the shoulders. We typically consider shoulders to be more like a secondary muscle group. And because of that, typically you probably don't need to train the shoulders with as much daily volume as you might typically train the chest, for example. But what you can do is probably train them more frequency. So with the chest and the back and all those bits and bobs, I would typically say you want to train them about twice a week. Maybe 3 times a week if you're feeling particularly spicy, but I think twice a week is more than sufficient. With the shoulders, you could really get away with training them anywhere from twice a week all the way up to about 4 times per week. But obviously, the more often you train a muscle, typically the less you do each time you train it. More frequency, maybe less daily volume. And like in most muscle groups, it's pretty effective to train the shoulders in both their shortened and lengthened position. So shortened position often refers to movements in which peak tension is at the contraction, so the end of the rep, a front raise in which you're close to the machine, where the peak contraction is up here, would be shortened position, and also the lengthened position in which peak tension is at more of the stretch position, or the bottom or beginning of the rep, in which you would consider something like a dumbbell shoulder press, in which the majority of tension is down here. And with shoulder training, I typically see them as more of like an add-on, rather than isolating a single day to shoulders alone. With shoulder training, I would typically do them throughout other sessions, so maybe I might do some shoulder work in my push session, so push being chest, shoulders, and triceps, maybe do some shoulder work in my pull session, so back and biceps. Push days, I might do my anterior and side delts. Pull days, I might do my side and posterior delts, because I don't think it's particularly necessary for most people to have a shoulder day, but we're going to go through that momentarily. Let's say you did want to do a shoulder day. What exercise might you consider for shoulders? You've got to consider a few things. Your anterior delts, so the front of your delts, are so heavily worked in any kind of chest movement. You do a chest press, you do a chest fly, the anterior delts they're quite involved. They really are. And rear delts are also fairly involved when you do any kind of pulling motion, especially if you're pulling at 45 degrees, like an upper back or mid back row. Your rear delts will be getting absolutely hammered there. But obviously it's still very important to train them both. So what I would do is this. I would typically split into 4 exercises. So exercise selection 1 would be anterior delt compound. So that would typically be like a shoulder pressing variation. So either a seated dumbbell shoulder press, a machine shoulder press, something along those lines. Something in which you're working the anterior delts in their lengthened position. And obviously because this first exercise is more of a compound movement, I might typically do less reps. So let's say I do 2 to 3 sets of about 6 to 10 reps on this shoulder press variation. Exercise number 2, I will typically do a side delt variation, so like a side raise variation, in which I'm working my side delt in its shortened position, because muscles, when looking at shortened versus lengthened position, do typically tend to fatigue in the shortened position before they do the lengthened position. So we want to target the shortened position first here. So typically I might do something like a Y raise variation, so for example like a cable Y raise or something similar. And then with this second exercise, I typically bump up the reps a bit more compared to the previous one. I might do 2 or 3 sets of, let's say, 8 to 12, maybe even 10 to 15. And for exercise number 3, I would then try and target the side delts in their lengthened position. So I do a side raise variation which allows me to do so. So for example, that might be a cable side raise in which the cable machine is very low to the ground. It might be something like a behind the back side raise, which is probably my preferred one, or anything along those lines. Anything that allows you to target the side delts in their lengthened position. And similar sort of thing as above. Sets of reps, typically let's say maybe 2 to 3 sets of, let's say, 10 to 15 reps, anywhere in that kind of range. And then for exercise number 4, I would look at rear delts. So that would be any kind of rear delt fly or rear delt swing that you feel best aligns for your goals and that you enjoy and that you like. So for me, for example, that might be something like a rear delt swing with the dumbbells, a cable rear delt fly, anything along those lines, same sort of thing, 2 to 3 sets, so maybe about 12 to 20 reps here. And there you have a 4 exercise shoulder day that targets all of the bits and bobs you need to target. Kind of as I mentioned earlier, I feel like we're not including any kind of front raise variations here because the front delts are so heavily worked elsewhere through chest and whatnot. I feel like any kind of anterior delt isolation work like front raises isn't really necessary. If you did want to do so, you could maybe do like a cable front raise or something along those lines, more shortened position dominant, standing a bit closer to the cable machine. But other than that, I think 4 exercises alone for the delts is plenty. And the big thing you'll notice with all of these exercises is the upper arm angle. Everything we do, we want to do at about 30 to 45 degrees. So when we're doing a shoulder press variation, be that machine or dumbbell, we want to be pressing at about 45 degrees. When we do kind of any side raise variation, we want to be side raising about 30 to 45 degrees, so in the scapular plane. When we do any kind of rear delt variation, we want to be rear delt flying or swinging at about 45 degrees, because doing so best aligns with the fibre orientation of all the muscles we're looking to work. And also doing so helps us reduce involvement from other muscle groups. So for example, with the side raises, doing so in the scapular plane, so 30 to 45 degrees in front of us, really keeping the arms as straight as possible and trying to reach for the corners of the room we're in, helps minimize trap engagement and trap involvement, because oftentimes people do find their traps do take over when they're doing side raise variations, so we're going to try and reduce their involvement here. But to be honest, for me personally, including shoulder work would typically not involve a shoulder day alone, absolutely not. I would typically include my front and side delt work on a push day, and I would typically include my rear delt work and maybe side delt work too if I wanted to bring them up on a pull day. And I don't want to go through a push day too much now because I still need to cover chest and tricep work in the future. But what a typical push day for me might look like is maybe 3 chest exercises, 2 shoulder exercises, and 2 tricep exercises. Because like I said, I don't think the shoulders really require their own day. But if you want to have a shoulder day and feel like including a shoulder day would benefit you, then I fully support it. Just typically the way I say things. If you aren't going to do a shoulder day, 4 exercises exercises as we covered previously. If you're going to do it on a push day, 2 shoulder exercises on your push day, maybe anterior and side delt, and 1 shoulder movement on your pull day, typically rear delt. There is no right or wrong here. This is largely down to preference, and this is also largely down to doing what's best for you, and also what's best for your goals. At the end of the day, I could easily say this is typically how I would structure things for these reasons, but my reasons may not align with your reasons. Because our goals are different, or maybe our approach to training is different, then that's fine. That's absolutely, I support it. You got to do what's best for you. And the big thing to remember is, it's all well and good me structuring this how I would. If you don't enjoy it and you can't stick to it, it's probably not a very good structure for you. Because regardless of whether something is optimal or science-based, if it's not enjoyable, therefore not sustainable, and you can't remain consistent with it, it's probably not optimal. Optimal is quite a blanket term. Although I do love optimization, optimal doesn't consider variables such as consistency and enjoyment. So assuming all variables are checked in and everything is fine, this may well be optimal. If you can't stick to it, it's probably not optimal. Therefore, what is optimal for you might be very different to what is optimal on paper. So practical application versus theoretical application are very different. That is it, and that is a video. Shoulder training doesn't need to be too complicated. To be honest, training in general doesn't need to be too complicated. Simple, effective movements, and the movements that you can choose and the movements that I would typically recommend can be found in last Monday's video, in which I did the shoulder exercise tier list. So have a look at those and see what you think. Mix and match and kind of just fill in the gaps with the exercise that most tickle your pickle. But yeah, that is it, and that is a video. Now, obviously, we're going to crack on with comment question of the week, and it's a pretty good one, I think. A question about hamstring curls. You talk about the variations of curls to target the shortened position and the lengthened position. My gym does not have a lying hamstring curl machine, only a seated one. What is another option/exercise to get into that shortened position? The lying hamstring curl is very effective for targeting the shortened position of the hamstrings, whereas a seated leg curl is very effective at targeting the lengthened position of the hamstrings, largely due to the difference in body positioning, where you're sat, where the hips are sitting, all those bits and bobs. If you cannot do a lying leg curl due to the lack of equipment, what you could do is try and replicate that movement using a cable machine. So lie on the floor, ankle thing around your ankle attached to the cable machine, and just mimic that lying leg curl position. If that's uncomfortable for you and you feel like that's not working, another alternative which probably isn't quite as effective would be a standing leg curl variation. Ankle attachment around your ankle and just literally curl your heel to your bum using the cable machine. Any position in which your kind of legs, hips, and kind of body are all in line. If you are going to do a lying leg curl on the cable machine, I might typically put something like a foam roller underneath my hips, just for a bit of elevation, but you don't have to. That is it. That is video. Like I said at the start of the video, 1,300 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if you could reach out, that'd be bloody splendid. We very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below and subscribing to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you too have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, drop it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my bad hair day, and thank you for tolerating the video.